In a small town, where whispers spread faster than the truth, there lived a seemingly ordinary family. Mark, a man in his 30s, had married Anna, a black woman full of life and ambition. Together, they had formed a strong couple, their love going through the trials of life and the sometimes disapproving looks. However, the real challenge was hidden in a complex and silent relationship, that between Anna and her mother-in-law, Madame Lemoyne. Ms. Lemoyne, a woman of a certain age, had grown up in an era where racial prejudice was commonplace. Her backward ideas about race relations were deeply ingrained in her mind, and Anna, with her dark skin and frizzy hair, was never truly accepted into the family. Mark, although loving and protective, never dared to fully stand against his mother, fearing to break the family ties that had always been his basis. But one day everything would change. It had been several months since Anna and Mark had moved into the family home to take care of Ms. Lemoyne, who, after a fall, needed constant care. Anna, although always warm, could not ignore the palpable coldness of her mother-in-law every time they crossed paths. The little remarks, the forced smiles, and especially Madame Lemoyne's indifference towards her made her uncomfortable. But she told herself that with time, things would improve. One Sunday afternoon, Mark decided to host a family lunch, inviting close friends and family members to celebrate a special occasion. Anna had prepared carefully, wearing an elegant dress she had purchased for the occasion. She knew this kind of meeting would be a challenge, but she hoped that at least, for once, Madame Lemoyne would be pleasant, or at least tolerant. The guests arrived, their footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor, while the glow of the hanging chandeliers flooded the large dining room with warm, dim light. The walls were adorned with old portraits and heavy velvet curtains, creating a solemn atmosphere that seemed almost frozen in time. Anna, always attentive and helpful, bustled around the table, arranging dishes with quiet grace, her expert hands serving the guests with a controlled smile. Despite the gentleness of her gestures, she could not help but feel the gazes of the family resting on her, insidious and heavy, like floating shadows that never left her. She focused on simple gestures, filling the wine glasses, arranging the dishes. Yet every movement seemed calculated, every smile she offered seemed forced. Curious, even critical, looks from the guests sneaked up on her. But the one that bothered her the most was that of her mother-in-law, Madame Lemoyne, placed at the end of the table. Sitting there in her elegant dress, the old woman didn't even seem to really look at her. Instead, she scrutinized Anna in a piercing, icy way, as if searching for every imperfection to expose. The coldness of his gaze was palpable, like an ice cube slowly being pushed into the flesh. Anna could feel his gaze fixing on her skin, on her hair, on her posture. Everything she represented seemed to be a target for Ms. Lemoyne. Anna tried to focus on the conversations around the table, but her senses were heightened, too attentive to what was happening around her. Every burst of laughter, every word exchanged between the guests made her feel more vulnerable, as if her body was being observed at every moment. She knew that the gestures she made, even the most trivial, were evaluated, judged. A glass of wine that she served too slowly, a gesture that she made too quickly when handing out the dish, all this was an opportunity to criticize her presence, to reduce her to a stranger in a world that did not recognize her. The meal progressed without major incident, but the atmosphere seemed to get denser by the second. The laughter of the guests, light at first, gradually became more tense, as if a veil of unease had fallen over the room. Madame Lemoyne, always silent but observant, patiently waited for her moment. It was only a matter of time before she spoke her mind. Then, as if this heavy silence were the scene of a carefully orchestrated drama, Madame Lemoyne stood up. The sound of his chair scraping the floor echoed through the room, shattering the tranquility of the moment. The guests froze. She stood there, straight, authoritative, her eyes fixed on Anna, as if waiting for a reaction. In a sharp and deliberately provocative tone, she said, "Mark, are you sure you're happy with your choice of wife? She doesn't look like anything I would recognize as worthy of my family." The weight of his words hung on the air, and in an instant, the entire room froze. Anna felt her breath catch, and her heart instantly sank in her chest. The humiliation was quick, brutal, like a slap she hadn't seen coming. The guests, paralyzed by the silence that had fallen, also seemed frozen, incapable of reacting. Their gazes, as if suspended in space, looked elsewhere for answers, but none of them dared to intervene. Mark, who was sitting right next to Honor, seemed to turn pale. He gave a nervous smile, trying to break the awkwardness, but his lips trembled slightly, betraying his embarrassment. His gaze turned to his mother, then to Honor, caught between two worlds. "Mom, now is not the time," he tried weakly. He stood up slowly, as if to stand between the terrible scene that was unfolding and the woman he loved. But his mother's voice, full of contempt and cold authority, cut his words short.
"The moment."
"Oh, but there's always the moment to tell the truth," Madame Lemoyne retorted, her tone razor-sharp.
"Don't you see what is she?
This woman. She doesn't fit into anything. Where did she come from?
What did you see in her?"
She turned her head towards Anna, scrutinizing her, as if waiting for a response to her accusations. Every word was a blow, a direct insult to his very existence. Honor felt a stinging heat invade her face. It was as if the ground had opened up beneath her, as if the entire world had shrunk into a narrow bubble where only her pain existed.
Shame, anger and sadness mixed within her, forming a whirlwind of uncontrollable feelings.
She felt her stomach twist, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to keep a calm facade, but the emotion was overwhelming her. She couldn't believe what had just happened. It was like a strange dream, an unreal scene. There she was, her dignity crushed by this woman who, instead of accepting her, violently rejected her. It was more than the surface of his skin, more than its color. It was his identity, his humanity that was under attack. The world around her seemed to disappear, as if she were in a tunnel, alone facing this attack. Mark, still frozen, did not react as she hoped. He did not stand up to defend her, he did not shout, he did not scream against injustice. He remained there, caught in the invisible meshes of filial loyalty, torn between his wife and his mother, unable to break this toxic bond. This lack of support made her feel even more vulnerable, abandoned in this ocean of contempt. The room, although silent, had become an arena, where the guests observed the scene without intervening. Honor felt almost invisible, as if everyone was complicit in this tacit humiliation, as if in this room no one wanted to get wet. She was alone. Alone in the face of this raw hatred, alone in the indifference of those who had accepted, without questioning it, the domination of Ms. Lemoyne. Suddenly, the heavy, almost palpable silence of the room was torn by Anna's voice, shy at first, then growing in strength and confidence until it rang out with a clarity no one expected. His words, like lightning in the night, struck everyone in the heart. "I'm not something you can judge or reduce. I'm Honor.
I have a name, a story.
I worked hard to get where I am. If that bothers you, then that's your problem, not mine." Anna's tone was firm, resolute, a stark contrast to the subtle humiliation that had overcome her a few minutes earlier. Her eyes, full of dignity, fixed on Madame Lemoyne without blinking, without retreating an inch. Her mother-in-law's gaze, initially cold and calculating, hardened, anger slowly emerging from her eyes. But Honor, in this suspended moment, did not let herself be impressed. She was no longer the discreet, self-effacing woman that Madame Lemoyne thought she could dominate. Honor was now a force, a woman proud of her identity, her journey, her love. "I don't need your acceptance. I never asked to be welcomed into this family," she continued, her voice clear, sharp. "But what I will not tolerate is being treated like an inferior, just because I am different. Maybe one day, you will understand that your view of the world is limited. But in the meantime, know that I am here, alongside Mark, and nothing and no one will make me back down." His words rang through the room, piercing like a bell of truth. Madame Lemoyne, although so sure of herself, seemed to waver for a moment, trying to retaliate, but nothing came out of her mouth. The silence that followed seemed even heavier, more heavy, because everyone in the room, even those closest to them, knew that something fundamental had just changed. The guests, frozen, all had their eyes fixed on Honor, some looking away, uncomfortable with the glare of the confrontation. Others, however, seemed to appreciate the strength that honor exuded, although few of them dared to show it. However, a flash of pride rose in Anna's eyes. She had taken her place. She had spoken words that would resonate far beyond this dining room. She had faced adversity, without weakening, without letting herself be crushed. She was a woman who asked for only one thing: respect. And today she demanded it. Mark, who until then had remained in the shadows, seeming caught in an internal struggle, slowly got up. A determined calm settled over his face, and his eyes shone with an intensity Honor had never seen in them before. He looked at his mother, then, in a firm and definitive voice, said, "Mom, you've crossed the line. Honor is my wife, and if you can't respect her, then I don't know how to continue this conversation." His words were like stones thrown into a calm pond, disrupting the tranquility that had been maintained by tension until then. The room was now a silent battlefield where honor and loyalty clashed. Ms. Lemoyne, visibly enraged, stood up abruptly, her chair hitting the ground violently. His eyes flashed with anger, his hands shook slightly, but his face remained implacable. "You choose me? One day you will regret abandoning me," she spat, her voice sharp as a blade. Mark did not back down. He stood straight, his shoulders broad, his gaze straight into his mother's. He answered without hesitation, his tone cold, without an ounce of doubt. "Maybe, but for now, I choose to support the person I love and live honestly." His gaze then turned to Honor, and in this simple but powerful gesture, he expressed everything that was most intimate and sincere. He approached her and placed a light kiss on her forehead, a kiss that seemed to seal not only his love for her, but also his commitment to truth and respect. It was an act of defiance and loyalty at the same time, a clear message to his family. He had chosen his side. The silence that followed was strange, almost unreal. The murmurs began to rise slowly, but almost imperceptibly, like distant waves gathering momentum. The scene, which had started as a simple meal, had grown into something much bigger. It was no longer a private argument, but a symbolic moment. A moment when the truth had come to light, there, in this marble and gilded setting, where the family, once again, found itself confronted with realities that could no longer be ignored.
The murmurs, at first timid, spread beyond the walls of the big house.
Neighbors were talking about it. Friends were whispering about what had happened. The news reached Mark's colleagues, and even further afield, in circles where Ms. Lemoyne had always been seen as a respected figure. What should have been a simple family dinner had turned into a silent revolution, an act of rebellion against a world frozen in its prejudices. Honor, now at the center of this whirlwind, felt both exhausted and filled with new strength. She had gained something more valuable than any social approval. She had gained her own respect, and that of the man she loved. But more than that, she had shattered a mirror of truth, a reflection that could no longer be ignored. She was here to stay, proud, dignified and strong. Nothing and no one could make her go back. In the days that followed, Ms. Lemoyne found herself increasingly isolated, rejected by the same people she had once considered her allies. She tried to contact Mark, but he refused to speak to her. Rejection, shame, and awareness of her own narrow-mindedness began to consume her. But that wasn't the end of the story. For what happened after that day, what began as a humiliating confrontation, had sparked profound change. Mark, confronted with the reality of the situation, realized that he had to make a choice between his mother and his wife. A month later, Mark and Honor decided to leave the family home to start a new life elsewhere, far from the influence of Mrs. Lemoyne. Their love, stronger than ever, united them, and what could have been a moment of defeat for Honor had become a silent victory. They had chosen to be together, to assert their love, and to live according to their own rules, far from the chains of the past. The world was no longer speechless. Honor had spoken, and in the silence that followed, changes had begun to be heard.